Hi, and welcome to Your Truth Explored, the podcast where we unpack your truths to bring clarity, understanding, and insight into what lies ahead. My name is Rodney Reynders. Today we take some time to speak with Alex Bundgaard around counselling, how he became a counsellor, the hopes and dreams of a young man entering this space, the invitation to others considering counselling, and the expectation of clients going to see a counsellor. So strap in, enjoy, and let's explore your truth. Very good. Well, today we have a privilege of meeting a superstar. You know, in my business, I get to talk to a lot of people, and you get to meet people that are at various stages of their careers and their aspirations and hopes and dreams. And this is a young man I've met through my placement and my counseling game, and has really inspired me to consider the value of the young men that are moving into this space. And so I was quite keen to have him here. And so welcome, Alex.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you very much, Rodney. It's great to be here.
It's it is an interesting conversation because I'm a man in a counseling space, and I know that that's a fairly rare commodity, but I'm 50. So how does a young man like yourself find yourselves pursuing, and you're at the end of a master's journey, so you're my superior by a long way in the context of counseling. So how do you find yourself there?
Yeah, superior by no means. Absolutely not. I can't disagree with that more, but it's been good. It's been really interesting, and yeah, like you said, I do find myself in a unique position where not many young people sort of get to the master's stage in counseling or even psychology. It's like it takes a bit of experience and life experience, and you find that the average age of a graduate is a bit older. But it's a unique stance I'm in now, and it's really exciting. I've still got a lot to learn, but I've really enjoyed the experience thus far.
Alex, what's the hurdle? So again, focusing on this, on the male component of counselors, why is there only me, you, and then 10 other ladies standing around us?
It can be a lot more simple than some people might say. Like, I would say a big part of it is that men don't go to therapy for the most part. Therefore, if a man has no experience in therapy, they don't really understand it, no experience whatsoever, then they might not think of that at all when considering a career, considering any interests. It might not be even an option for them.
Okay.
And so I think that that plays a part that maybe not a lot of people talk about.
Did you have an experience in the counseling world that drove you towards the industry?
Absolutely. So as throughout my teenage years, I had some lived experience with some mental health struggles, like many of us do. But I took the initiative at the time to seek therapy and go down that route, which was incredibly beneficial for me at the time. And but I think about how many of my peers and my friends, and even just people around me at that time who were going through similar things but didn't quite take that route when it came to sort of addressing that problem. So, I had quite a positive experience, and I was already sort of geared towards this sort of work. I was really interested in the field already and just how people are, why they do that, what they do. Learning my learning more about my experience was also a big pivotal thing. But I always sort of semi fit into that role in my friend groups growing up. People sort of found it interesting that I was more grounded and that I was good to chat to. So it had me thinking about it as a career kind of early on.
Is the needle moving? So when you say my peer group, they weren't signing up for the counseling course alongside you as easily. Is the needle moving on that scenario? Is the youngsters considering that as a viable option in this day and age?
Well, in terms of career aspirations, you know, I'm not too sure about the if it's the needle's much moved yet, but I think in terms of young men seeking counseling is definitely more now than I've seen maybe 5 years ago. And I think that's mainly because it's very publicized now about, how it's good. We got different institutes like the Black Dog Institute. We have certain athletes talking about it in the media about how they benefit from it. So I think now more than maybe previously, at least when I was in school, in high school, it it's more in people's faces now than before. So I think men are in ther or young boys in particular are seeking out counseling, and that's more normal now than I think it's ever been, which as a result could equal more male counselors as well.
Yeah. In your journey, you've done psychology and you've done counseling. And so where do you sit on that line?
So I started off in psych as an undergrad and doing my master's in counseling. And, I enjoyed the psych undergrad and I learned a lot. And for the longest time, I thought psychology was going to be my focus. But I made a pivot to counseling when I realized, I started having more experiences with clients and I started to really value the the freestyle kind of approach and the less clinical approach to things. And I found it incredibly enjoyable. I've had anecdotes from clients as well saying how counseling is kind of what helped them more in some cases where they don't need a clinical approach. Maybe they just need, someone to help them work through their issues in a way that they can choose and design. And, you know, uh, it's been great to experience that. I think they're both incredibly valuable. And I think when kids are coming out of high school and choosing, oh, I want to work in mental health, I think a lot more need to consider counseling from the get-go because, I've had clients talk about their experiences in therapy and you'd be surprised about how many would probably maybe benefit more from counseling than psychology per se.
If you're listening and you're going, I know I need help, but I don't know where to go, it is very much a horses for courses situation. So counseling, and if I may put my coaching hat on, coaching goes, that's all unfortunate. Let's draw a line of sand and let's keep going. A counselor will go back to a significant event, we'll unpack that event, we'll camp there a little bit, we'll work out the stories around that event and then go from there. And a psychologist is going to go right back to the trigger moment and he's going to apply clinical processes. And neither's wrong and neither's right. It's just a horse for course. So whatever you need, that's the door you need to knock on. Now, Alex, the research is that the modality is almost insignificant because 80% of the value of a client comes from the connection with the counselor, coach, psychologist. Is that your experience? And if so, how do you navigate that? It's fairly big pressure there.
Absolutely, and there's two ways you can sort of look at that, right? Is the 80% of it being towards the relationship, sure, in one aspect, it can put a lot of pressure on you to really get this connection going and just how important that is for the therapeutic success of the session. But it also might alleviate a bit of pressure and stress because now it's less about your, therapeutic modality of choice and the application of that and, whatever else that might encompass. It's more so just concentrating on the here and now. And when people hear that statistic, the 80%, they're often very surprised to hear that. And I think when I first heard that and started looking into the literature around that, just around the client effects versus the therapist effects and what they mean to the success of the session, it was definitely eye-opening to say the
Yeah.
least. And it helped me sort of go, yeah, well, counseling I think is something I want to do more of.
It's almost like you're counseling me by flipping the script, going, yes, you can see it that way, but there's other options. You can see it another way. I like that. That's awesome. So, Alex, do you have a modality of choice?
When it comes to modalities, I wouldn't say I particularly subscribe to, you know, uh, an exclusive one or or anything like that. I obviously have ones that I prefer, but I think, you know, a PCT, person-centered approach is obviously for me a requirement from anything else you might use, but you know, the classic CBT and narrative therapy, I think for me are great, and maybe a bit of acceptance and commitment. I think those are great, but you know, like we said, for me, I think the most important thing is really, being there with them. And I think if you get too heady about sort of what needs to be happening, almost like an expectation you have for your therapy, you start to blur the lines between, whose session it is. But
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. So for me, I might have an idea of some things I want to do with certain issues, but until I'm sitting in that room and it's all unfolding, you really don't know.
And that's such a valuable insight that so the client is always the expert, and we can come along with a few great ideas. If the client doesn't want to go there, that's also okay. And I think maybe Alex, if I've come along to a counselor and I've had a bad experience, or I've come along to a psychologist and I've had a bad experience, what's your advice for me then in that situation?
I guess, as cliched as it is, I'd like to understand more about what made it negative. Because when we perhaps see a doctor in a traditional sense, how they are doesn't matter much in terms of getting what we need. But when it comes to working in mental health, and seeing a counselor or seeing a psychologist, even seeing a social worker, it very much is a sort of relationship of styles. And I think there can definitely be bad fits and good fits, but I think people need to be told that when they're approaching it for the first time.
Yeah,
And I think it's very likely that if you've had a horrendous experience, I wouldn't give up on it just yet,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. I like that. If I can paraphrase it, it's more of a fit problem than a counseling problem or a psychologist problem. And I'm a ex-accountant, so I like the dot matrix approach, whereas others are very arty and they are very free flowing. And so I might work well with somebody who's an accountant but terrible with the next budding Monet artist of the world. And so that doesn't make me good or bad. It just doesn't make me the right fit for them. And so if you're listening and you've had a bad experience, consider that maybe just that particular experience was not a good fit. But the value that we forfeit by just drawing a line in the sand and going, I'm not doing it, I tried it once, it didn't work, is quite an expensive bill to pay, because there is a lot of value if we will find the place where we have the right fit.
That's right. And I totally understand when someone is, the initial investment is tough, especially if it didn't work out your way. But, if you're listening to this and you've made this initial investment, it hasn't worked out the first time, you know, consider, yeah, that it wasn't a right fit, give it another try. Because one experience, I think it's harsh to write off the whole thing.
Do you have a favorite story that where you sat back and you looked at the client and you went, yep, this is why I do this thing?
I wouldn't say there's a massive standout moment, but there is a collage of micro moments where, in an instance where maybe the week before they things were tough, things were really heavy, and they exercised some courage to try some new things and they took something away from that session, and then here comes the next week, they're in, and just the I walk in and they're smiling a bit more and they're proud of something that maybe happened and some progress that they've made. And I think little things like that really have a lasting impact on me, and in that moment where you can share and celebrate a little bit, maybe a big development in this client's journey, I think is great. And you know, it's it's just the little wins I think that mean the most.
And so tell me about um, the academic process, the run up to the rubber in the road. How do you look back on that process?
In this sort of field of work, it's a long and arduous academic process, uh, as I'm sure you're aware, Rodney. And when I look back and see that the and I look at the academic journey I've had, it's taught me a lot, and it's been a great experience. But I think what's more important is also the experiences I get outside of the classroom, and how lived experience and life experience really do impact how you come to the session as well, and what you sort of bring to the table in terms of you as a practitioner, and you with your personality. So I think, you know, it's a long journey, absolutely, but it's I think it's great to have as much experience as possible, even in the unis and hitting the books. It's good, and I feel yeah, I feel good coming into sort of the last year of my master's.
Now that you got putting rubber on the road, is it a completely different animal to the academic version?
If we put it in the in like an animal sort of way, it's almost like you spent a few years sharpening your spear, I suppose, and really looking at it, and you know what this animal looks like. But when it comes to getting in there with it, it's sure, you might know sort of what to do, you have an idea of how things are going to go, but it just comes down to things don't always go the way you think they do, and but I think on the hands-on learning you get towards the end is great, but it's good that you have a bit of academic learning before,
Yeah.
because you know it's a very vulnerable environment, and it's always better to be prepared, and as prepared as possible before you sort of start taking on clients.
I don't know if this is true for you, but I know I've had a chat with a number of people that are in this industry, and they're getting towards the end of their undergrads or their masters, and then they're ready to pull the pin. They're just like, this is, yep, I'm out. What's your word of encouragement for those guys? Yeah, because I sometimes wonder, I don't think it's the industry that's the problem. Maybe it's the expectations. But yeah, anyway, what's your words of encouragement for them?
That does happen a lot. People go through the process and they maybe get to placement, and start to get that hands-on experience, and maybe, yeah, they had some expectations about how it would go, maybe how they would go in the placement, and things might be a bit harder than what they thought, or maybe they're not enjoying it, which is a shame. But I think in any early career, there's always going to be self-doubt in terms of your ability. But you know, that hurdle, once you're over that hurdle and you start to see the successes, and maybe things aren't so turbulent off the start, then it's really rewarding. But some people are gonna it's not for them. So it's it's unfortunate that with the hands-on component being sort of later in the academic sequence, some people just don't find out that they want to do it until the end, which is it's a shame, but that's sort of how it's set up, so that you are prepared, and
Yeah.
then yeah, what happens happens.
So it seems in this industry, and especially with those newer people stepping up to the plate, this idea of the imposter syndrome seems to be a fairly prevalent voice in their heads. Is that your understanding too? And if so, do you have advice for anyone that is dealing with that particular element?
In terms of imposter syndrome, it hasn't been overwhelming for me, but I have moments, as we do as the early professionals, you have a bit of imposter syndrome at times. And my word of advice for that would be to try and sort of adjust the expectations a bit for sort of what you expect out of your sessions, and how things are going to look like immediately after you start your hands-on component, because the more pressure you have on yourself to succeed, the less likely it is that you're going to do well. And even just understanding that you put in however many years it took you to get there, and everything else that you've learnt from life, you carry with you. And, those are prerequisites and barriers of entry for you to be in that position. So trusting in the fact that, in the eyes of the university, in the eyes of, your agency, you are exactly ready to be where you are. So, trying to rest on that a bit more and maybe alleviating the expectations and just sort of seeing what happens. It's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to fail. No one's expecting you to be, an ace straight out.
Yeah.
So I think it's a expectation thing.
So you allude to this idea of um, in the imposter syndrome and having to even consider deal with it yourself. But clearly you're getting over it, and I wouldn't know it because I've watched you many times, and I think, man, that dude's again is good. So what's helped you? What's got you over the line?
So for me, it has been a approach of relaxing into the flow of my sessions, expectations, they come up, but to try and erase those as much as possible. And for me, when you sort of change the mindset from running from learning or hard, things that might be hard, maybe not taking on a client that, oh, I don't know how well I do with them. For me, it's just been I want to do everything I can, difficult, not difficult, and sort of making an expectation for myself to take on everything that comes my way. And, you know, for good or worse, learning is always forefront in my mind, especially in the working component, the placement of this degree. It's that's why we're here and that's why I'm here. And for me, if I put the learning before maybe success or maybe, you know, yeah, it's the learning when that's the most important thing, I just find that even if it's hard, it's good for me.
Now, I'm interested the modern day student where we're all online and barely know each other. It seems to me that comes at a cost. And so what I've enjoyed about placement is that you've actually got bodies around you. So you're bouncing ideas, you're going, oh, this is what I would do, what would you do? And looking at how other people do stuff, and you can bounce that back to and fro. So what value does the cohort do you feel brings to a person that's taking those first big steps into the industry?
I think that the in-person cohorts are fantastic. At least in my experience, I was doing my undergrad when COVID hit, and when that sort of happened, it was the education space was, and it was weird to say the least. Like, and I think having an in-person experience now, when most things are sort of online for the most part, it's been really great. And the quality of learning that I received in person compared to online, and the amount of attention and attentiveness I give to people, and you know, I just think it's kind of not even comparable,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would know the answer, and I don't know if you might, but you kind of look back in your journey and think, oh, I wonder if we could get a greater component. And I know we do the role plays in our run up. It's just a completely different animal when you sit in the room. And I'm a big fan of if somebody's going to be my client, I want to say, look, be the worst, whatever I'm struggling with, be that guy. Because I need that guy. And I guess I'm a bit like you then. I want the hard one to see if I can crack it. Yeah. Do you think the model needs to be evaluated, or it is what it is and we just make it work?
You know, the model right now, it definitely is, it's not perfect, but I think that the role play sort of model as it stands, it can be as good or as bad as you make it to be. So, for
Yeah.
example, Rodney, like you just said, give me the hard client, whatever. that quality of practice versus someone who's not taking it seriously, and no one's checking on you. Like you two people could go role play and they could talk about their weekend, and no one's checking on you. But at the end of the day, you're cheating yourself, and the role plays, it's not real. It doesn't compare completely to a real client, but you can make it work as much as you can. And given it is the current model, I think until something better comes along, then it's best to just do it the best you can. And as for like what would be a better way of getting that practice for the future, I'm not too sure, to be honest, because you need the people, you need the bodies, and you know you need the practice. You're all there. It makes sense, but you're right, it is different when people don't quite take it as seriously. So yeah, it can be as good as bad as you want.
Yeah, I like that statement, Alex, where you're robbing yourself if you don't take it seriously. And I think maybe if you're listening and you're in the run up or you're thinking about doing counseling, that's an absolutely golden opportunity, that role play scenario. But you do need to change your mindset from, well, here we go again, to, and my mindset's always been, I want to see if you can talk me into a corner, and if I'm the counselor, I'm going to see if I can get on mate to go to a real place. That was always my mental challenge that I never put out there. But I had a game plan, and I think it made a difference. But you can see the people that have got no game plan, that they just want to tick the hour, and you lose, like I would lose if the other person is not fully engaged in the role play, and you as the counselor would lose if I don't fully engage. So it's just such a lose-lose scenario. So if you're listening and this is something you're doing or thinking about doing, maybe let's see if we can change our thought pattern around role plays, because they are as close as you're going to get to the real thing. So in my experience, there's definitely a couple of camps in the style of counseling. And the one that I want to bring to the forefront right now is this idea of a more timid approach. Now, that could be insecurities, but that could also be a character, a nature, the natural way of delivering their counseling. Do you feel like that's fine? What's your thoughts on the more timid approach?
If I was a counselor that was a bit timid, but not in terms of maybe my nature, but I'm feeling a bit insecure, maybe a bit of imposter syndrome, I think that's something to definitely, to think about. And I think it's very easy of us sometimes to say I'm more of a timid person, or I'm a little shaky with it. But I think there's a time where you need to listen to it. What your body's maybe trying to tell you, what could be happening for you. Otherwise, if a timid person, a quiet person, there's a type of therapist for that, absolutely. And there's a type of, softness and maybe lack of expectation that a therapist like that brings to a client. And, I think it's always good as well to not be put yourself in a box as well of I'm this kind of way, or I'm not this kind of way. I think that to a degree, you need to be able to adapt a little bit to your client as well, and sort of like we do, meet them where they're at. And, whatever that might need, I think is also a very important thing to consider.
Mm. Alex, you've got your whole career in front of you, unlike me. That's working on closing the back door. Now, how do you feel about the AI influence in this space? What's the language for you when you think AI?
With the AI, it's very interesting because a lot of people come up and tell me, are you worried about AI taking, your role away from you, and people preferring it maybe over a human counselor, which, it's not an impossible possibility, like let's admit it. But I think that, the future for AI in counseling, to be honest, will be more in the the admin side of things, and you know, getting people resources, and better educating them maybe on some therapeutic talk and some psychoeducation. But will people choose AI for their counseling and therapeutic needs? Absolutely. But will that be a permanent thing? Will that be the the easy choice, the easy answer? I don't think so, because at the end of the day, the human touch and the human connection, which is what a lot of our clients are really looking for, it's not something that can be supplemented with an AI.
Yeah,
And
funny thing.
it's interesting because it's a murky waters in terms of what the potential of AI could be. But the way I see it, I'm optimistic, and I think it has a future for helping people with mental health. But as for it being a counselor over a human, I just find that to not be the case.
Yeah, I'm always, and I've been asked that question a few times myself, and I always reflect on that same research we spoke about at the start. 80% of the success of the session is linked to the relationship with the counselor. Very hard to make a relationship with an iPhone or a computer that's staring at you. So tell me, what do you think, Alex, the industry looks like 20, 30 years down the line?
With the industry, my predictions will be it's a growing industry, especially counseling. It's quite in its infancy compared to things like psychology as a standalone profession. So I think counseling will it's got a long runway ahead of it in terms of, you know, maybe some government legislations about, protecting the title and things like that. I think is very inevitable and
Yeah.
is not that far away as 20 or 30 years, I believe. But in terms of the mental health space, I think it's going to be good because with the thing with the realms of like AI and and the popularization of a lot of these, you know, psychological terms. You can't go on social media with, or at least in my experience, without a young person talking about therapy or certain attachment styles. Could be anything, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the future of mental health is going to be a lot more people connected, people knowing all the resources, and I think it's going to be these services will probably be used more than ever before.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that it's a fairly young industry because I think a lot of people don't take the time to do that maths. So it is a significantly minor modality in comparison to psychology that's been around for yonks and yonks. And I always think, I can do a 5-minute course online and then call myself a counselor. I may not be able to get PACFA registered, but I can put my board outside and on the wall and invite the client in. And then I want to get a PACFA registration, and then we've got to jump the hoops that we've been jumping. So if you put the two counselors next to each other, it's two very different people that you're looking at. And so if you're looking at counselors, it's not my place to judge one or the other, but if there's a misfit, consider maybe evaluating that side of the thing. What is the supporting documents of the person that you are seeing? What's your encouragement, Alex, for client is gone, uh, the experience hasn't been great, he's reevaluated the counselor, the connection, try to find another connection, still hasn't worked. Is there a process for that person?
I think when things aren't working, it's better to look in as well and maybe see what's preventing change. Okay, so and really looking into that and seeing that what do you really need from a counselor? What do you really need in general? And sort of like what is counseling giving you?
If I may be so bold, it's my experience that I've had clients that have come to me and they just want to say they've got a counselor. That's the big payoff. The need to fix something or change something is secondary to this idea that I've got a counselor. And if that is you, this is not a judgment statement, but consider, because we don't do anything for nothing. There's a reason why we do everything. So if none of the cancers are a fit, it's time to have a conversation and go, what am I getting out from these things? I'm getting something. So what is it? And do I like that? Not good, it's not bad. It's just information. What do I do with that information? So, Alex, as we come to an end of this episode, what would you say to a young man who's contemplating the idea of becoming a counselor and going down the path you've been? What's your message to that man?
I would definitely encourage him, if he's looking for a very rewarding career that can really help make an impact on people's lives. And if that's really his interest, then absolutely. It's been a great journey for me. I can say only positive things really. I would say I would exercise a bit of patience though. Yeah, have your intentions in check and just be ready to learn. That's all I can suggest.
Well, Alex, I really enjoyed having our conversation and having you here, and as do I enjoy sort of teaming up with you in placement. So thank you for your time. It was great chatting.
All right, thank you so much for having me.